Why was everyone laughing? The echoes rolled through the concrete hall like gunfire, sharp, mocking, confident. A pack of young men in crisp fatigues, their laughter bouncing off the steel beams of the kill house. They were cadets, top of their class, molded by theory and arrogance. And standing at the center of their jeering circle was one woman who didn't laugh, didn't flinch, didn't even blink. Her name wasn't on any roster they'd seen. She wore the same standard issue fatigues, but hers looked older. Faded seams, worn knees, sun-bleached patches where rank once lived and had long since been removed. Her boots weren't polished. Her posture was unremarkable, the kind of posture you could walk past 100 times and never remember. But there was something about her stillness that unsettled the air. Cadet Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, handsome, rigid, and hungry for validation, paced in front of her. His voice carried the confidence of youth and the cruelty of insecurity. "Honestly, what is this? Bring your daughter to work day. This isn't a tour, ma'am. This is the crucible. This is where we separate operators from office clerks." His words hit like bullets meant to wound, not kill, each one designed to get a reaction, but she gave him none. Her hands kept working, calm and mechanical. The M17 pistol in her grasp gleamed faintly under the fluorescent lights. She disassembled and reassembled it with hypnotic precision, every click and slide a quiet defiance. Reynolds sneered. "That sidearm's heavier than you are." The cadets laughed again. And still nothing. She wasn't ignoring him. She was somewhere else entirely, her mind tuned to the rhythm of movement, of breath, of readiness. Every motion was efficient, deliberate, free of ego. Up in the observation deck behind bulletproof glass, a man watched. A four-star admiral, old, stoic, eyes like battle-worn stone. He leaned closer to the glass, studying her. He'd seen her before, or someone like her. The way her thumb brushed the magazine release without looking. The subtle bend in her knees. The weight transfer from heel to toe that spoke of 1,000 entries, 1,000 rooms cleared, 1,000 ghosts left behind. He saw it instantly. The ghost of a professional. Down below, the tension thickened. Reynolds basked in the laughter of his cadets, mistaking noise for power. "Listen up, people," he barked. "Scenario: active assailant hostage rescue. 2 hostiles, 1 hostage. Standard procedure: you will enter, you will neutralize, you will secure. Speed, surprise, and violence of action, that's your mantra." He paced like a performer under a spotlight, then stopped in front of her. "You, since you're so eager to play with the big boys, let's see what you've got. Your point. Show us all how it's done." The words dripped condescension, a setup for failure. But her only response was a soft click. Magazine seated, slide racked, weapon ready. The sound silenced the room. There's something unnerving about competence that doesn't need to prove itself, the kind that just is. For the first time, a few cadets shifted uneasily. They had expected fear, excuses, maybe even tears. What they saw instead was focus. The kind of focus that doesn't come from textbooks or training manuals. The kind that's earned in places too hot, too loud, and too final for comfort. She checked her holster, adjusted the strap, and gave a single nod to the range officer. It wasn't submission, it was acceptance. Mission received. The admiral above didn't move. He'd seen this before too, that calm before a storm. Reynolds smirked, mistaking stillness for hesitation. "Problem, ma'am. Door's right there. No one will judge you for walking out." The laughter came again, smaller now, uncertain. She finally looked up, not at him but at the door. A plain slab of steel, a problem to be solved. Her expression didn't change, but something in the air did. When she moved, it wasn't with the sharpness of aggression. It was the smooth glide of a predator who knows its hunt by heart. The range officer's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. "Shooter is hot. Stand by for entry." A red light blinked above the door, washing the room in a pulse of color that turned every face into something ghostly. The hum of the ventilation system seemed to fade beneath the collective breath being held. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. The cadets watched, leaning forward. Reynolds folded his arms, lips curved in a smirk. She waited for the signal. Execute, execute, execute. On the first syllable, she was gone. She moved like liquid, not running, not charging, just flowing. One step, two, door handle turned. She didn't kick it open. She sliced the pie, clearing the corner, muzzle and eyes moving as one. A breath. A blink. 2 shots. Pop, pop. Then another pair. Pop, pop. Silence. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 seconds. Outside, the cadets stood frozen. Some hadn't even realized she'd entered. Reynolds's arms were still crossed, but the smirk was gone. His jaw twitched. His eyes darted toward the door as the green light flicked on. Range clear, the loudspeaker announced. Time on target 2.7 seconds. All shots center mass head box. Hostage clear. Silence. 2.7 seconds. The number echoed in their skulls, almost unbelievable. In the kill house, that wasn't a time, it was a myth. The steel door opened and she stepped out, calm, expressionless. No swagger, no pride, just a professional finishing her task. She holstered her weapon, her hands steady. Her eyes found Reynolds's for a moment, and there was nothing in them. Not victory, not anger, not even satisfaction, just indifference. The kind of indifference that cuts deeper than humiliation. The Admiral descended the stairs from the observation deck, his steps slow, deliberate. The cadets snapped to attention instinctively. Reynolds straightened, throat tight, pulse hammering. The Admiral didn't look at him. He stopped in front of the woman. The two locked eyes, a silent exchange, deep and wordless. "Report," the Admiral said. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was even and clear. 2 hostiles, 1 hostage, entered left, sliced the pie. First hostile 5 meters, 2 rounds, thoracic cavity. Second hostile 7 meters, using hostage as cover. Step out shot 2 rounds, cranial-ocular cavity. Hostage secure, no collateral risk. The words were clinical, detached. An after-action report from someone who had long since made peace with violence as a form of precision, not rage. And that was when Reynolds realized he wasn't dealing with a trainee. The Admiral turned to the technician by the console. "Pull up the file, all of it." A few seconds later, the massive screen on the far wall flickered to life. Lines of text filled the space: name, rank, history. The room fell silent. Name: Sharma Anya. Rank: Chief Petty Officer. Unit: Naval Special Warfare Development Group. SEAL Team 6. The words landed like thunder. The laughter from earlier died in every throat. Reynolds's blood turned to ice. His own reflection on the polished floor looked like a stranger. 14 deployments, Navy Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart, a service record that didn't speak, it roared. The rest of the page was redacted, classified to a level that only the Admiral could read. The woman they'd mocked wasn't a visitor. She wasn't a contractor. She was one of the most decorated special warfare operatives in the United States Navy. And they had laughed at her. The Admiral finally turned to Reynolds. His voice was quiet, but each word hit like a hammer. "Cadet Reynolds, you have a question about this sailor's performance." Reynolds's mouth opened, but his throat betrayed him. "Sir, it's just the time. It's not a standard result." "You're right," the Admiral said, "because you're not dealing with a standard sailor." He turned to the cadets, his gaze slicing through the room. "You judged a warrior by her silence, by her size, by her gender. You mistook humility for weakness. You looked at a legend and saw a target." No one moved, no one breathed. The Admiral faced her again. For a heartbeat, the old warrior's eyes softened. Then he raised his hand in a salute. "Chief, thank you for the demonstration." The cadet stared, stunned. A four-star admiral saluting a chief, breaking protocol out of pure respect. She returned the salute, crisp and unceremonious. "Any time, Admiral." That was all. The admiral left. The cadet stood in silence. Reynolds's confidence shattered like glass at his feet. And the woman, Chief Anya Sharma, walked away. No applause, no recognition, no words. Only the echo of her boots fatting down the corridor. The lesson would echo longer. Because in that sterile kill house, surrounded by steel and arrogance, a group of future officers had learned something they would never forget. The loudest in the room is rarely the most dangerous. And the quietest is often the one who already won the war. Why did silence feel heavier than gunfire? The kill house was empty now. The laughter, the bravado, the cruel jokes, all gone. What remained was the echo of 2 gunshots and the quiet shame of a dozen men who'd just seen a ghost of their own arrogance. Chief Anya Sharma had left the building 20 minutes ago, but it felt like she was still there. Reynolds stood alone on the concrete floor, the smell of gun oil and sweat thick in the air. The echo of the admiral's salute still burned behind his eyes. He'd spent his life chasing validation, commanding attention, demanding respect. But in 3 seconds, a woman he'd mocked had stripped him bare. He replayed it in his mind. Her movements, her calm, her silence. How could someone so unassuming hold that kind of control? He felt it in his chest, that strange, unfamiliar thing. It wasn't anger, it wasn't even humiliation. It was fear, not of her but of himself. Because for the first time in his career, he realized just how fragile his confidence was. Up in the observation deck, the admiral remained. Alone, his reflection warped by the glass. He watched the cadets below file out, each one subdued, haunted. The noise was gone. The noise had been the problem all along. He turned to the range officer beside him. "Make sure that recording is archived," he said quietly. "Label it Sharma Drill." The officer hesitated. "Sir, was that official?" The admiral gave a faint smile, the kind that carried no warmth. "Nothing about what you just saw was official." And with that, he walked away. Outside, the day was too bright for what they had just witnessed. Sunlight spilled across the asphalt like a lie, pretending everything was normal. Reynolds found himself standing at the edge of the lot, staring at the horizon. His mind replayed her voice, the crisp, unshaken report she'd given the admiral. 2 hostiles, 1 hostage. No hesitation, no pride. Just precision. He thought about the way she'd looked at him, or rather, the way she hadn't. How her eyes had passed over him like he wasn't even there. And in a way, he was. Not in her world. Not yet. He didn't know her story, but he could guess the kind of places that shaped someone like her. War zones that didn't make the news. Rooms cleared in the dark. Decisions made in half-breaths that decided who lived and who didn't. She didn't need to raise her voice to prove anything, because she had already survived everything. That night the cadets gathered in the mess hall, usually loud, always competitive. But tonight the air was subdued. Forks clinked against trays. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every glance carried the same unspoken thought: we saw something we can't unsee. No one mentioned her name. No one dared. Finally, one cadet, younger, nervous, broke the silence. Was she really SEAL Team 6? No one answered. Another cadet, older, shook his head. That was no drill, that was something else. Across the table, Reynolds sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, eyes distant. He didn't eat, he barely breathed. "Sir," one cadet ventured cautiously, what happens to us now?" Reynolds didn't look up. "You learn," he said quietly. The table went still. "You learn," he repeated. "You remember what happened today and you learn, because the next time you think you've got someone figured out, He finally looked up, his eyes hollow. "You'll remember the chief." The words landed heavy, like a confession. And then he stood and left. Outside, the night was cool. The sound of waves carried faintly from the nearby coast, rhythmic, endless, patient. The kind of sound that reminded you how small you were. Reynolds walked along the path behind the training compound, past the dim glow of streetlights and the rusted chain-link fences. His mind was chaos, replaying every second of the day. Every word he'd said, every smug smile, every echo of her pistol. He stopped at the edge of the kill house. The door was still closed. The red training light above it was dark now, lifeless. But he could almost hear it again, the intercom, the command, her motion, the shots. 3 seconds. 3 seconds had rewritten everything he believed about strength. He stepped closer to the door, his voice barely a whisper. "Who are you?" But there was no answer. Only the hum of distant power lines and the weight of his own reflection in the steel. The next morning, the story spread like wildfire, faster than any official report ever could. The base was alive with whispers. Instructors leaned in at coffee stations. Cadets traded fragments of the tale like contraband. She beat the kill house record. 2.7 seconds, clean. The Admiral saluted her. She was SEAL Team 6. No one knew her name. No one needed to. They just called her the Chief. By the third day, someone had pinned a paper target on the wall outside the range, 4 clean holes, 2 in the chest, 2 in the head, and written beneath it, "Quiet Professional." It became a mantra whispered before training sessions, a talisman against arrogance. And somewhere deep down, Reynolds knew that was the beginning of her legend. But legends have a way of leaving marks on the living. Reynolds couldn't sleep. He lay awake night after night, the ceiling fan chopping the air above him, the sound of her voice, calm, deliberate, replaying over and over. He'd been so certain of his place in the world. Certain that authority came from confidence. That leadership meant dominance. And then she'd walked in small, quiet, unassuming, and reminded him that true power doesn't raise its voice. It just acts. He started showing up earlier to drills, staying longer after hours. He reviewed footage of his own team's exercises, looking for what he'd missed, the subtleties, the quiet cues, the invisible competence that didn't need applause. He realized how much he'd overlooked, how many quiet sailors he'd dismissed, how much damage arrogance had already done, not to others but to himself. One evening, while reviewing simulation footage in the control room, Reynolds noticed the Admiral standing in the doorway. The older man didn't say anything for a long time. "You've been watching it again," the Admiral finally said. Reynolds nodded. "I can't stop." The Admiral stepped closer, arms crossed, studying the paused frame, Sharma's figure mid-entry, 1 foot barely visible in the breach. "You're trying to understand her," the Admiral said. "Yes, sir." "You won't," he replied. "Not fully. People like her, they live in a different rhythm. You and I operate in time. She operates in instinct." Reynolds frowned, searching for words. "Sir, was she really one of them? DVGRU?" The Admiral's eyes didn't leave the screen. "That's all you need to know." There was a long silence. Then he added, softer, almost to himself. "She's what happens when experience stops being theory and starts being survival." Reynolds swallowed hard. "Why send her here?" The Admiral gave a small, knowing smile. "To remind us what we've forgotten." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You think you were humiliated, Reynolds, but if you learn from it, really learn, you'll understand. You weren't the victim of that lesson. You were its purpose." And then he was gone. Later that night, Reynolds sat alone in his quarters. The base had gone quiet, but inside his head, the echo of gunfire still pulsed. He opened his notebook, the one he used for training notes, and began to write. Not tactics, not drills, just words. Leadership isn't volume. Respect isn't given by rank. Competence speaks quietly. He paused, then added a final line. Remember the chief. He closed the book and stared out the window at the lights across the water. Somewhere out there, she was already gone, back to wherever people like her go when their work is done. He wondered if she even remembered his name. Probably not. But he'd remember hers for the rest of his life. A week later, the training facility buzzed with new cadets. Fresh faces, loud voices, the same cycle of pride and noise starting all over again. Reynolds watched them from the far end of the range, leaning against the wall, silent. He knew what was coming. They'd learned the same lesson he did, if not from her, then from the myth she left behind. He smiled faintly. It wasn't arrogance anymore. It was something else, something closer to gratitude. Because some lessons don't need to be spoken. They just need to be lived. And somewhere, in a quiet corner of the world, a woman with a calm voice and worn fatigues prepared for another mission. She didn't know that her silence had changed an entire generation of soldiers. She didn't need to. Her job was never to be remembered. It was to remind. Sometimes the echo of respect begins with the sound of a single shot and the silence that follows. Why did she always wake before the alarm? Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was memory. Maybe it was the quiet part of her brain that never stopped listening, even when the war was over. If it ever truly was. Chief Anya Sharma sat on the edge of a narrow bunk, the faint glow of dawn bleeding through the blinds. The world was still, the kind of stillness that felt temporary, like the moment before a storm. She ran a thumb along the edge of her watch. The back was scratched, the strap worn thin. It wasn't a standard issue anymore. She'd kept it from her last deployment. A cheap digital piece that had survived places where men hadn't. 500 hours. She stood, her movements quiet and precise. The barracks were half empty. The others still slept, young sailors, full of restless dreams and untested confidence. She envied them a little. The way they still believed war was something you could train for. She pulled on her fatigues, faded, familiar, and laced her boots, double knot left before right. Ritual, not necessity. Every motion a memory. When she looked in the mirror, the face that stared back wasn't the one she remembered. There were lines now, faint ones around the eyes, a mark above her temple from a scar that had never fully faded. But her eyes, those hadn't changed. Still steady, still watchful, still carrying too much. She didn't look like a legend, and she preferred it that way. They sent her here, the training facility, not as punishment, not even as a mission, just to observe, to give feedback on the next generation of operators. She hadn't expected the arrogance, the noise, the posturing, but then again she had once been like them. She once believed that control came from command. That strength meant never breaking. That silence meant discipline, not damage. But she knew better now. She learned the hard way that silence is sometimes just the only thing left after the noise has taken everything else. Her mind drifted. She hadn't wanted it to, but it did anyway, the way it always did in the quiet moments. Afghanistan, 2011. A night so dark the stars seemed to hide. She could still feel the dust in her throat, the hum of the Black Hawk beneath her boots, the smell of oil and adrenaline. She remembered the brief. She remembered the voice in her headset. 2 hostiles confirmed, 1 HVT, capture or neutralize. She remembered landing in the valley, the sound of the rotors fatting, replaced by the crackle of comms and the whisper of her own breathing. Then the sound that never left her. The shot. Not hers. It had come from the left flank, too soon, too high. Her teammate, Ramirez, was hit before she even saw where the round came from. The rest of the mission was a blur of instinct. She'd neutralized the threat, secured the HVT, completed the objective. But none of that mattered, because Ramirez didn't make it, because she'd been 2 steps too far to pull him out, and because afterward in the debrief, when they called it a success, she couldn't bring herself to say a word. That was the day she stopped talking in rooms that didn't understand loss. And that was the day silence became her armor. Now, years later, standing in the empty kill house, she could still smell the cordite from yesterday's demonstration. She could still hear Reynolds's laughter and the way it had died. She didn't blame him. Arrogance was a kind of innocence, too. A luxury the unscarred could afford. She had seen his type on every deployment, young officers full of confidence and doubt in equal measure. She knew his downfall would sting, but it would save him if he let it. That was why she hadn't said anything after the demonstration. Not because she didn't care, but because real lessons are never heard. They're felt. She walked the length of the kill house, her boots echoing softly. The brass plaque wasn't there yet, it would appear weeks later, but the air already held its memory. She stopped in front of the door she'd breached the day before. The steel was cold under her palm. She could still feel the weight of the M17 in her hand, the rhythm of movement, the quiet certainty that came from repetition and fear living side by side. She'd always been fast, but she hadn't been born that way. Speed for her wasn't about reaction time. It was about memory. Every movement she'd ever made had been forged from something she'd once done wrong. Every perfect double tap was an apology she could never give. She took a slow breath, then holstered her sidearm again, not because she needed to, but because routine was the closest thing she had to peace. As she turned to leave, the door opened. Admiral Hayes stood there, hands behind his back, eyes sharp as ever. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked around the room, the walls, the scuffed floors, the faint residue of powder on the targets. "You know," he said finally, "I watched you in Kandahar, 2012. You cleared a compound faster than any operator I'd seen." She gave a small nod. "Different times, sir." "No," he said quietly, "same lessons, different audience." She looked at him, really looked at him. The years had weighed on him too. He carried them in his posture, in the way his hands trembled when still. "You didn't have to step in yesterday," she said. "You could have let him drown in it." "And miss that face he made when he realized who you were," the Admiral said with a faint smile. "No chance." They both chuckled softly, two soldiers who'd long forgotten how to laugh properly. Then his tone shifted, lower, sincere. "You did what needed doing. You reminded them that quiet isn't weakness." She didn't answer. Because it wasn't about proving anything. It never was. "What are you going to do now?" he asked. She looked back at the door. "Keep moving, I guess." He nodded, understanding more than he said. "That's what you do best." He started to leave, then paused. "Sharma," he said softly, "you ever wonder why people like us never sleep well?" She met his gaze. "Because we remember too much." He nodded once. "Exactly." Then he was gone. She stayed in the kill house a while longer, alone again. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was almost comforting. The world outside the military was too loud for her. Too many opinions, too much noise. But here, in the echo of steel and discipline, she could breathe. Still, she knew she wouldn't stay long. That wasn't who she was. The Navy had always been her anchor, but it was also the storm that kept her adrift. People like her weren't meant to retire. They just faded from one mission to the next until the world forgot their names. And that was okay. Because legacy wasn't about being remembered. It was about leaving something behind worth remembering. Later that night, she sat outside the barracks on the steps, a cup of bad coffee in her hands. The moonlight hit the tarmac in silver streaks. Somewhere across the base, a group of cadets ran drills, their shouts echoing faintly. She smiled not at their mistakes, but at their energy, at their unbroken faith that skill could be earned through repetition alone. Maybe it could, maybe not. She thought about Ramirez again, about the ones who didn't come home, about the silence that followed each name, read aloud in the chow hall after an op. She took another sip. The coffee was cold now, but it didn't matter. Because tomorrow she'd leave this place, quietly as she'd come. No ceremony, no goodbye. But before she did, she'd make sure the recording stayed. Not for fame, not for pride, but because sometimes the world needs a reminder of what humility looks like when it's holding a gun. Hours later, as the base went dark, she lay awake. The ceiling fan hummed, a slow rhythm that matched her pulse. Her mind drifted to the kill house, to the desert, to the sound of that single shot that started everything. She didn't dream anymore. Not in the way most people did. Her dreams were silent, just flashes of light, and the sound of breathing, calm, steady, controlled. In those dreams, she wasn't haunted. She was whole, for 3 seconds at a time. True strength isn't found in the noise of command. It's born in the quiet that follows loss. Why did her silence stay louder than every order he'd ever given? 3 months had passed since the kill house. But for Cadet Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, time hadn't dulled anything. He still saw her every morning, not in person, but in memory. The way she had looked at the door, not the crowd. The way her breathing hadn't changed under pressure. The way 3 seconds of calm precision had stripped him bare in front of everyone. Some scars are invisible. This one lived behind his eyes. He still taught the same cadets, still wore the same uniform, still stood in the same hallways where laughter once came easy. But something inside him had changed, something fundamental. He spoke less, listened more. When a cadet stumbled, he didn't bark. He waited, he watched, he learned. And in that silence, he began to understand what she'd been trying to teach without saying a word. Leadership wasn't about noise. It was about presence. Every day, the cadets whispered her name. Not out loud, not fully, just fragments. Did you hear they made it official? The Sharma drill. 2.7 seconds, clean. At first, Reynolds hated hearing it. The memory made his stomach twist. But gradually, he started to see something else in their eyes when they said her name. Not mockery, not gossip. Respect. They were beginning to understand, too. He'd walk past the brass plaque by the kill house, the one that had appeared quietly one morning, and slow his step every time. It was simple. No photo, no ceremony. Just a name, a time, and 3 words. The Sharma drill, quiet, professional. Someone had taped a target beneath it, 2 tight double taps, one in the chest, one in the head. The holes were perfect circles. It had become a shrine. Every new class touched it before training. Some said it was for luck, but Reynolds knew better. It was for humility. Late one evening, he sat in his quarters staring at his own reflection. The man in the mirror wasn't the one from before. The sharpness in his eyes had faded, replaced by something quieter. He still wore the uniform, but it fit differently now, like it belonged to a man still earning it. He opened a small notebook on his desk, the one where he'd started jotting lessons after that day. The first page still bore her name. Sharma. Under it, a single line. Competence doesn't announce itself, it just acts. He turned the page and wrote another. If you ever think you're the smartest person in the room, you're not listening hard enough. He stared at the words for a while, then closed the book and leaned back. The sound of the sea drifted in through the window, calm, eternal. He remembered what the Admiral had told him. You weren't the victim of that lesson, Reynolds. You were its purpose. He understood that now. 2 weeks later, he stood in front of a new class of cadets, fresh faces, full of noise. They looked at him the same way he'd once looked at others, as if they already knew everything worth knowing. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't assert control. He just started talking. You think leadership is about being the loudest voice in the room, he said quietly. It's not. It's about being the calmest. The cadets shifted, uncertain. He could almost hear his younger self in their smirks. You think the battlefield rewards confidence. It doesn't. It rewards competence. He let that sit. Then he gestured toward the far wall, the plaque gleaming under the fluorescent lights. You'll hear stories about that day, he said, about a chief who walked into the kill house and embarrassed a room full of us. A few of the cadets nodded. They'd already heard the whispers. You'll think it's just a story, Reynolds continued. A myth, but it's not. It happened right here. I was standing exactly where you are. The room went still. I laughed at her, he said. I thought she didn't belong here. I thought her silence was weakness. But I was wrong, dead wrong. She cleared that house in 2.7 seconds, and every shot, every single one hit center mass. He paused. No one breathed. That day cost me my pride, but it gave me something better, clarity. He turned back to the class, his voice steady. You'll meet people like her in your careers. Quiet, ordinary, invisible maybe. You'll think you're their superior, you'll be wrong. Learn to recognize them, learn from them, because those are the ones who keep the rest of us alive. After the session, as the cadets filed out, a young ensign stopped beside him, nervous, hesitant. Sir, he said, what happened to her? Reynolds looked at the plaque. She went back to work, he said simply. People like her always do. The ensign frowned. Do you think we'll ever see her again? Reynolds smiled faintly. You already have. Every time you pick up your weapon, and don't underestimate the person next to you. Later that night, Reynolds found himself drawn to the kill house again. He stepped inside alone. The room still smelled faintly of oil and metal. He imagined her standing there again, calm, precise, untouchable. He walked through her steps, left foot forward, sliced the pie, corner clear. His breathing steadied as he moved, mimicking her rhythm. Pop, pop. He whispered it under his breath, feeling the muscle memory settle into his bones. He wasn't trying to match her speed. He knew he never could. He was trying to understand her stillness. And for a fleeting second, he did. In that silence, he felt what she must have felt, not adrenaline but focus, not fear but peace, the moment where action and thought became one. It was beautiful and devastating. The following morning, word spread that Admiral Hayes was returning to the base as a guest speaker. The announcement sent ripples through the ranks. His lectures were rare, his stories legendary. When the day came, the auditorium filled to capacity. Reynolds stood at the back, watching as the Admiral stepped to the podium, his presence commanding yet gentle. He spoke of discipline, of humility, of the invisible weight of leadership. And then, inevitably, he spoke of her. There was a day, he began, when a room full of cadets learned the difference between arrogance and mastery. The crowd went quiet. They saw what real strength looks like, not loud, not proud, but measured, controlled, deadly. He told the story in broad strokes, no names, no embellishment, but everyone knew. Reynolds watched the young faces around him, eyes wide, chests rising a little slower, egos shrinking a little smaller. It was working. The myth was doing what truth alone never could. When the speech ended, the Admiral stepped down from the stage and moved toward the exit. As he passed, he caught Reynolds' eye. You kept the lesson alive, he said softly. Reynolds straightened. It keeps itself alive, sir. The Admiral nodded, satisfied. That's how you know it's a good one. Months rolled by. Seasons changed. The cadets who had witnessed that day graduated and spread across the Navy, pilots, divers, officers, and specialists. And with them the story went too. Whispered in ready rooms, told in hushed tones before missions. The tale of the chief who cleared a house in under 3 seconds and humbled an entire generation. The Sharma drill became more than a legend. It became a mirror, a test, a reminder. And Reynolds, once the fool at its center, became its guardian. He didn't chase redemption anymore. He lived it. One evening, as the sun set over the water, he stood by the plaque again. The metal caught the dying light, glowing faintly. He reached out and brushed the engraved letters with his fingertips. He thought about what the Admiral had said, about lessons that keep themselves alive, about strength that doesn't need applause. Behind him, a group of cadets walked past, whispering. "That's him," one said quietly, "the guy from the Sharma drill." Reynolds smiled, not with pride but with peace. If his name was part of that story now, it was only because he'd learned from the right teacher. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Thank you, Chief." The wind carried the words away, scattering them across the training ground, where someday someone new would stand, make the same mistake and learn the same truth. Some lessons don't echo in noise, they whisper through generations. Why did she say yes again? Chief Anya Sharma stood on the tarmac under a moonless sky, the roar of a C-130 fatting into the humid night. The air smelled of jet fuel, sea salt, and inevitability. She told herself that her last deployment would be her last, but here she was again, new operation, same shadows. The briefing had been simple, too simple, a quick insertion, 2 targets, 1 objective, extract an intelligence asset gone dark inside hostile territory, the kind of work she'd done 100 times before. But she knew better. The briefings were always clean, the world never was. Her team moved quietly behind her, 4 operators, all younger, all sharp. None of them knew who she really was. They knew her as Chief Sharma, the quiet one, the professional. That was enough. She liked it that way. Inside the dimly lit hangar, the mission commander went over the plan. Maps pinned to a board, red markers tracing paths through a nameless jungle. He talked fast, efficient, confident, the voice of a man who trusted his team more than luck, but not by much. "LZ is here. Extraction window 20 minutes. You breach, grab the asset, exfil through Route 2. Sharma nodded once, no questions. The commander glanced at her. "You've done this before, Chief." She looked at him, expression calm, voice even. Enough times to know when to keep it quiet. A few of the younger operators smiled, not mocking, admiring. She earned it already, and they didn't even know how. When the briefing ended, she checked her gear, night vision, M4 carbine, suppressed sidearm, extra mags. Every click and strap was muscle memory. Her world was built on repetition. She ran her thumb over the grip of her pistol, the same one from the kill house. Still scratched, still perfect. Hours later, the team was wheels up. The Black Hawk cut low through the clouds, its rotor wash blending with the wind. Below them, the jungle stretched like an ocean, endless, dark, alive. Sharma sat near the door, headset pressed to her ear, eyes scanning the horizon. She didn't talk. She didn't need to. The new guys still had the restless energy of men trying to prove themselves. She remembered being like that once. The world had burned that version of her away. The pilot's voice came through the comms. 1 minute. The red light flashed above them. The team checked weapons, gave thumbs up. Sharma just breathed slow and steady. Her heart rate didn't rise. It hadn't in years. When the light turned green, they jumped. The night swallowed them whole. The landing was clean, silent. They moved through the jungle in a line, eyes scanning, ears tuned. Every sound was a possible threat. The mission clock was running. Sharma led from the front. The path ahead was narrow, slick with rain and mud. Her movements were fluid, almost invisible. She knew how to blend with her surroundings, how to disappear between breaths. 50 meters ahead, she raised her fist. Stop. The team froze instantly. Through the NVG tint, she saw movement, two armed guards by a corrugated metal structure, smoking, careless. She studied their rhythm, the turns, the packing, the small human habits that betrayed routine. Then she spoke, low and precise. Left guard smokes every 12 seconds. Wait for it. The men around her nodded, trusting her timing without question. 12 seconds later, she moved. Two suppressed shots, clean, synchronized, almost musical. PFF, PFF. The guards dropped soundlessly. The younger operator beside her exhaled. Holy! She cut him off with a look. Stay focused. They advanced. Inside the structure was a small compound, flickering lights, peeling paint, smell of diesel and rust. The asset was in the far room, tied to a chair, beaten but alive. Sharma checked the corners first. Always corners, always. Clear left, she whispered. The others moved with her, clearing each section with the practiced rhythm of training. But to Sharma, it wasn't training. It was life. When they reached the asset, she knelt, cutting the zip ties with her knife. We're getting you out. The man looked at her through swollen eyes. You're American. Close enough, she said, almost smiling. She slung his arm over her shoulder, signaled her team, and they started moving toward the exit. Then a noise, a metallic click behind them. Instinct, not thought. She turned, firing before she even registered the shape in the doorway. One hostile down, another. The room erupted in chaos, shouting, gunfire, the whistle of rounds snapping through the air. Her team returned fire, moving in controlled bursts. The asset screamed. The walls lit up with muzzle flashes. Contact rear, two more. Sharma pivoted, eyes calculating angles, corners, shadows. Her body moved before her mind could, the kind of reflex that came only from surviving too long. Two more down. Then silence again. Her breath came slow, her pulse didn't spike. We're clear, she said, voice calm, almost detached. The others stared, not just at what she'd done, but how she'd done it. The younger operator shook his head, disbelief on his face. Chief, that was insane. She just checked her mag, replaced it, and said softly, that's called doing the job. They made it to extraction with seconds to spare. The Black Hawk lifted off into the dawn, the jungle shrinking beneath them. The asset was safe, the mission was clean, on paper it was perfect. But perfection always came with a cost. Sharma stared out the open door as the wind whipped through her hair. The horizon bled orange and gold, a new day painting itself over old ghosts. She thought about Ramirez again. About every operation that ended just like this, successful, silent, invisible. The world would never know her name. That was the point. But in moments like this, she wondered what it would feel like to be seen. Not celebrated, not decorated, just understood. When they landed at base, the debrief was quick. Command congratulated the team. The younger operators basked in quiet pride, adrenaline still in their veins. Sharma gave her report in 12 sentences. No emotion, no embellishment. 4 hostiles neutralized, 1 asset recovered, no casualties, team performed as expected. That was all. The commander nodded. Good work, Chief, you've still got it. She just gave a polite smile and walked away. No one saw her hands tremble slightly as she removed her gloves, not from fear, not even from exhaustion. From memory. Later in the barracks, she sat on the edge of her cot and stared at her gear laid out before her, rifle cleaned, sidearm stripped, boots drying by the door. Everything in order, everything controlled. Outside, laughter drifted from the canteen, her team, celebrating. She didn't join them. She never did. She picked up her watch again, the same one she'd worn since Afghanistan. The scratches caught the dim light. She pressed the side button. The display blinked, frozen at 0003. 3 seconds. Her best time. Her worst memory. She exhaled long and slow and whispered to no one. That's how long it takes to change everything. The next morning she received a message: transfer orders. Not a request, a directive, back to the States. Instructor advisory rotation. She read it twice. The Navy had a way of sending people where they were needed most and least wanted. She folded the paper, slipped it into her pocket, and smiled faintly. Of course. Another lesson to give. Another room to walk into quietly. On the transport plane home, she sat by the window, watching clouds pass beneath her like memories too heavy to hold. She thought of the young operators she'd left behind, eager, fearless, unscarred. They reminded her of Reynolds, of how easily arrogance can be mistaken for confidence. Maybe that was why she kept saying yes. Because every time she walked into a room full of noise and proved that silence could win, she gave the next generation a chance to learn before the world taught them harder. That was her mission now. Not to fight, but to remind. She closed her eyes, the drone of the engine steady and low. For once she let herself rest. And in the hum of the cabin she heard the ghosts again, not accusing, not haunting, just present. Ramirez's voice, low and steady. "You did your job, Anya." She smiled faintly, whispering back, "I'm still doing it." The words faded into the engine's roar. Outside, the horizon turned gold. And in that brief light, between one mission ending and another beginning, she looked almost at peace. The strongest hearts aren't built from victory. They're built from what you survive in silence. Why did the air back home feel heavier than the jungles she'd left behind? Chief Anya Sharma stepped off the transport plane into a gray Virginia dawn. No sand, no gunfire, no rotors chopping the sky. Just rain-soaked asphalt and the faint metallic scent of jet fuel. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the weight of quiet. The base looked the same as it always had: order, discipline, repetition. But something was different. Everywhere she turned, someone was whispering the same phrase. The Sharma drill. The words had followed her home. They'd out-traveled her. She had become a story told by people who didn't know her face. She walked past a training field where new cadets were running CQB drills. Their rhythm was clumsy but earnest. Each movement shouted instead of spoke. She almost smiled. Every generation had to find its own silence the hard way. The office they'd given her was small, windowless, and filled with the hum of fluorescent lights. Her title was Advisory Liaison. That was Navy language for ghost consultant. She'd review procedures, refine tactics, offer notes. No classroom, no applause. Just paper, screens, and memories. She unpacked one thing, a small brass plaque, the same kind that hung in the kill house. She set it on her desk. 3 engraved words: quiet, professional, always. It wasn't pride. It was grounding. Something to remind her why she still wore the uniform. She didn't expect visitors. But the knock came anyway. "Come in," she said. The door opened and there he was. Commander Reynolds. Older, calmer, a different light behind his eyes. He saluted first. "Permission to enter, Chief." She raised an eyebrow. "You outrank me, Commander." "Not today, ma'am." His voice carried none of the arrogance she remembered. Only respect. She gestured to the chair across from her. "You've changed." He gave a quiet laugh. "That's the general consensus." They sat in silence for a moment, 2 soldiers linked by 3 seconds that neither could forget. They made me an instructor here, he said finally. Leadership development. I tell your story sometimes. My story. The lesson, really. He leaned forward. They listen. You can see it in their faces when the noise shuts off. It's like they understand that competence doesn't need to shout. She studied him. The posture, the tone, everything about him was different. Less performance, more purpose. You learned, she said softly. The hard way. He smiled, not proudly but honestly. You gave me the only education that mattered. She looked down at her hands. I didn't mean to humiliate you. You didn't. He paused. You saved me. The words hung there, heavier than gunfire. Over the following weeks, their paths crossed often. He'd stop by her office with questions, sometimes about training, sometimes just to talk. He asked about instinct, how she decided when to act, when to wait, how to read a room without words. She answered in fragments, small truths she'd learned through repetition and regret. If you're listening for fear, you'll always hear it. Listen for breathing instead. People tell you who they are when they exhale. Never chase control. Hold steadiness. Let chaos break around you. And when in doubt, slow down. The right move survives the pause. He wrote them down. Later, those lines would become lecture slides, leadership quotes, mottos pinned to dorm walls. But she never knew that. She just spoke from memory, lessons bought with blood. One evening, after training hours, Reynolds invited her to the kill house. You haven't seen what they've done to it, he said. She hesitated, then followed. The building was the same, concrete, steel, the faint smell of oil and powder. But something new glowed on the wall by the entry door. The plaque she'd seen in photos was now mounted in glass, polished bright by hundreds of hands that touched it before drills. Below it, a small metal plate read, 2.7 seconds, respect in action. Beside the plaque, a target sheet, 4 holes tight and perfect. Someone had written underneath in black marker, speed is nothing without control. She stared at it for a long moment. You did this? She asked. Reynolds shook his head. No, Chief, they did, the students, it's tradition now. He handed her a headset. Want to see what your legend looks like in practice? She almost refused. But something inside her, curiosity, maybe closure, made her nod. They ran the simulation. Lights low. Intercom ready. Reynolds watched from the observation deck as a young female cadet stepped to the line, pistol drawn, stance tight but trembling. Shooter is hot, stand by for entry. Red light. Heartbeat. Door swing. Pop, pop. Pause. Pop, pop. The timer froze, 3.6 seconds. Not perfect, but close. Close enough that everyone in the observation room exhaled together. The cadet stepped out, hands shaking with adrenaline. She looked up at the deck, searching faces for approval. When her eyes found Chief Sharma, realization flickered. Then awe. Sharma gave a single nod, the same small gesture she'd given years ago. Nothing more. Nothing less. But the cadet's smile said it was enough to last a career. Afterward, Reynolds found her by the door. You see, he said quietly, you're a ghost story now, the good kind. She shook her head. Ghost stories aren't supposed to be real. This one needed to be. They walked outside together, the evening air cool and damp. The field lights buzzed in the distance. Cadets jogged past, shouting cadence lines that had somehow softened over the years. Reynolds stopped near the fence. You ever think about retiring? She thought for a long moment. Every day, she said, and then I remember why I stayed. Because of people like them. Because of people like you. He looked at her, startled, humbled. She meant it. The redemption in his eyes proved that the lesson had taken root. The next morning the base held a small ceremony, unofficial, quiet. Reynolds had arranged it with the Admiral's blessing. No medals, no speeches. Just a folded flag, a salute, and a few words carved into the base of the plaque. In honor of those who teach without speaking. Sharma stood in the back, hands clasped behind her, uncomfortable with the attention. When the flag detail finished, Reynolds turned to her. "You'll never know how many careers you've changed." She smiled faintly. "That's the point, Commander. You're not supposed to count what matters." He chuckled. "You always know how to end a conversation." Occupational habit. Later that night, she walked the perimeter road alone. The moon was high, silver on the water. Each footstep echoed softly, steady, unhurried. She stopped near the pier where the sea met the land. The waves were slow tonight, almost gentle. She watched them for a while, her reflection moving in the dark water. She thought of Ramirez, of the countless faces that time had erased but memory refused to. She thought of Reynolds and the cadets, and the quiet hands polishing a plaque they would never fully understand. And for the first time in years, she felt something lift. Not joy. Something simpler. Relief. Maybe legacy wasn't about being remembered at all. Maybe it was about leaving behind people who no longer needed you to explain. She stayed there until the first light touched the horizon. The sea turned from black to blue, the base sirens calling the new day to order. She whispered softly to the waves, to the ghosts, to herself. Lesson delivered. Then she turned and walked back toward the base, back into the noise she'd once despised, but had finally learned to make peace with. The greatest teachers speak in action, not words. Their silence becomes the sound the next generation follows home. Why does a whisper travel farther than a shout? Months passed. Chief Anya Sharma no longer wore the fatigue of constant deployments. She carried something quieter, lighter. But the ripples she left behind kept moving. What began as a training myth was turning into doctrine. It started with a memo, just a few sentences from an admiral to a handful of commands. Incorporate the Sharma drill into leadership evaluation modules. Emphasis, composure under pressure. No fanfare, no signature speech, just a note passed through the system like a current through wire. Within weeks, copies of that same line appeared on briefing slides from Norfolk to Coronado. Then across the branches, Marines, Air Force, even Army Ranger School. Someone had found the video, the grainy kill house footage. 2.7 seconds. 4 shots. No words. It played in classrooms full of officers and candidates who had never met her, never even heard her voice. But they all leaned forward the same way when the silence hit at the end. Reynolds watched the phenomenon with quiet awe. Every time he traveled to a new command to lecture, the story was already waiting for him. Cadets quoted her lines without knowing they were hers. Instructors began using Sharma as shorthand for balance. Find your Sharma before you move. That was a Sharma clear. Stay quiet, stay clean. It became culture. He kept a running list of the places her influence had reached. Guam, Okinawa, Djibouti, the decks of carriers she'd once deployed from, bases she had never stepped foot on. Everywhere, people were learning to breathe before they spoke. Sometimes he'd send her messages about it, short, factual, respectful. She almost never replied. But once, months later, a note came through his secure inbox. 2 words only. Keep steady. That was all she ever needed to say. Back in Virginia, Anya spent most of her days reviewing training footage and rewriting outdated procedure manuals. But her nights were hers again. She walked the pier after lights out, the smell of salt cutting through diesel fumes. The base was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. She didn't sleep much, but when she did, the dreams had changed. No gunfire, no jungle. Just the sound of cadets laughing, not cruelly this time, laughing like people who finally understood what they were part of. Sometimes she'd pass by the kill house and see candles flickering beneath the plaque, not official, never sanctioned. Just small tokens from sailors before deployment, a tradition no one had written down but everyone followed. She never stopped them. Some memories deserved ritual. Then came the letter, a civilian envelope thick, no return address. Inside, a single sheet of stationery and a photo. The photo showed a squad of Marines kneeling beside a wall in Kuwait, grinning after a successful extraction. Behind them, spray-painted in black across the concrete, quiet PROFESSIONALS move first. The note read, "Ma'am, you don't know me, but your drill saved us. We slowed down, we breathed, we cleared right. Everyone came home, thank you." She folded the paper carefully, slipped it into her pocket, and sat for a long time with her head bowed, letting the simple weight of those words do what medals never could. The Navy invited her to Washington once. A panel on ethics of modern warfare, suits and microphones. She lasted 20 minutes. When asked for her perspective on leadership, she gave one answer. Respect is earned in silence, kept in conduct and lost in noise. Then she left. The transcript of that single sentence was printed in the conference proceedings, quoted endlessly, misattributed half the time. She didn't mind. The words were doing their work. Back on base, Reynolds found her one evening watching the sunset from the bleachers by the parade field. He sat beside her without a word. "They're teaching the drill at Quantico now," he said. "Even the Marines?" she asked, smiling slightly. "Even them. And get this, the Air Force turned it into a stress management course. They made a logo." She chuckled, shaking her head. "Guess silence sells now." They watched the horizon for a while, the orange light glinting off the flagpole. "You ever feel like you're fading out?" he asked. "That's the idea, Commander. You fade out so they can stand up." He nodded. "Still, some of us wouldn't mind if you stuck around a little longer." "I'll be around," she said quietly, "just not where people look." The years turned. Commanders rotated. Cadets graduated. The world found new conflicts to throw young men and women into. But wherever they went, a small brass plaque seemed to appear in kill houses, in flight simulators, in ship corridors. Always the same inscription, the Sharma drill, 2.7 seconds. It became a superstition. Touch it before training, breathe once, remember what quiet competence feels like. Instructors told the story differently each time. Some said she was still out there. Some said she'd retired to a cabin by the coast. Some swore she never existed, that she was an archetype the Navy invented to keep egos in check. Anya never corrected any of them. Myths did better work than people. One spring morning, Reynolds received a sealed envelope marked confidential personnel transfer. Inside was a photo, grainy, satellite shot, of a relief mission somewhere in the Pacific. A small figure at the edge of the frame loading supplies into a helicopter. The caption read, "Civilian Consultant A. Sharma, NGO Attachment." He smiled. She hadn't stopped serving. Just changed uniforms. He wrote a letter that night but never sent it. Instead, he opened his notebook and added one more line under her name. When legends leave, they don't disappear. They turn into standards. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Chief Sharma, now simply Anya, stood on the deck of a humanitarian vessel. No insignia, no weapons. Just crates of medicine, radio static, and a horizon full of work still to be done. A young medic beside her asked, "You used to be in the Navy, right?" "Once. Ever miss it?" She thought for a moment. "I miss the sound of people learning to trust themselves." The medic nodded, not fully understanding but feeling the truth anyway. That night, alone in her small cabin, Anya opened the folded letter from Kuwait again. The paper was worn at the creases, the ink smudged. She traced the words with her thumb. Then she looked out the porthole, the sea black and endless. The same sea that had carried her to war and back again. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe the lesson had outgrown her. She whispered to the dark water, "You're in good hands now." The waves didn't answer. They never did. But she could almost hear the echo, 1,000 cadets, 1,000 drills, 1,000 quiet professionals breathing before they moved. Back at the Virginia base, Reynolds gave his last lecture before retirement. He stood in front of a room packed with officers. The final slide of his presentation was just a still image, a woman mid-stride, pistol raised, eyes calm. He said nothing for 10 full seconds. Then softly, "This is what professionalism looks like. Remember it when the noise comes." No applause. Just silence, the respectful kind. When he walked out afterward, he didn't feel old. He felt finished. As he passed the plaque one last time, he saluted it. "Lesson received," he murmured. Far across the ocean, Anya stood on the deck of the relief ship as dawn broke. A small bird landed on the rail beside her, fearless, unbothered by the movement of the sea. She smiled at it, whispering as if to an old friend, "Stay quiet, stay steady." The bird took flight, vanishing into the sunrise. She watched it until it was gone, then turned back to work, another crate, another task, another day. For once, she didn't feel like she was escaping her past. She felt like she was walking beside it, unafraid. When noise fades, legacy speaks, and the truest echoes are the ones that teach the living how to listen. Why do some names fade, while others refuse to? 5 years had passed since anyone at the academy had seen Chief Anya Sharma. But her presence was everywhere. On walls, in manuals, in the quiet rhythm of training rooms where young recruits breathed before they moved. The Sharma drill had stopped being a story and become a culture, a habit written into muscle memory across the military. Even the civilians who trained alongside the Navy called it by name. And yet the person behind it was gone. No medals, no interviews, no trace. Until one late summer afternoon, when a letter arrived at the base addressed simply to Commander Reynolds, Ret. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. He opened it slowly, expecting an old comrade's courtesy note. Instead, he found a single paragraph. "Commander, if you ever find yourself near Port Solace, look west at sunset. I'll be somewhere in that light." A.S. No address, no signature beyond the initials. But he knew. A month later, he made the drive, hundreds of miles down the coastline, through quiet towns and salt-worn docks. He didn't know what he expected. He just knew he needed to go. By dusk, the road ended at a small inlet, one of those forgotten corners of the map where the world still breathed in long, slow waves. He saw her before she saw him. Standing on the pier, hair tied back, wearing a faded field jacket with no patches, no rank. She was helping a local fisherman tie off his nets, sleeves rolled up, salt spray catching in her hair. For a long moment, he just watched. This was what peace looked like when it finally stopped running. "You found it," she said when he approached. "You knew I would," he replied. They stood there together, watching the sun sink into the sea, that same horizon they'd both crossed too many times to count. "So this is where you disappeared to," he said. "Not disappeared," she corrected, "just dissolved." She gestured toward the horizon. "You spend enough years chasing clarity, you forget what it looks like. Turns out it's just this, doing something simple that helps someone who'll never know your name." He nodded, letting the wind fill the space between them. They still talk about you, he said. New cadets, the drill, the philosophy. Philosophy, she said with a soft laugh. That's a generous word for staying calm under pressure. It's more than that, he said. You gave them a way to think, to breathe. You made silence a form of discipline. Silence has always been discipline, she said. People just don't like listening long enough to notice. They sat on the edge of the pier as the tide climbed higher. The waves slapped against the wood, steady and patient. He told her about the cadets he'd mentored, the classrooms, the stories she'd inspired. She told him about the relief missions, the earthquakes, the storms, the endless human noise that never quite drowned out the need for grace. You ever miss it? He asked. She thought for a moment. The uniform, no, the people, sometimes. But I think what I really miss is the quiet between chaos, that breath before a breach when everything's still possible. He smiled. You know they still time that moment. Do they? Yeah, 2.7 seconds is standard across training now. She shook her head slowly, smiling into the light. Not bad. I always thought it'd take longer for the world to slow down. A gust of wind rolled through, carrying the faint sound of gulls. The water shimmered gold. Reynolds turned to her. You never told anyone what happened that day, did you? What was there to tell? The gun, the laughter, the way you... No, she said gently. I never told it because the story isn't mine anymore. She looked out at the sea, her voice steady. The second you turn a lesson into a legend, it stops belonging to the person who lived it. It belongs to the people who need it. Maybe, he said, but I think people still deserve to know who you were. They already do, she said, glancing at him. They just call it something else now. The sun dipped lower, bleeding red into the horizon. Neither of them spoke for a while. There was nothing left to prove. Nothing left to explain. After a long silence, she said softly, Do you remember the first thing you said to me? Something stupid, I'm sure. You called me invisible. He winced. I was an idiot. No, she said. You were honest. I was invisible. That's how I stayed alive. That's how most of us do. He turned to face her. And now? Now, she smiled faintly. I think invisibility finally served its purpose. The last light faded, leaving the world in that thin blue space between day and night. She stood, brushed the salt from her sleeves. You heading back tomorrow? She asked. Yeah, maybe I'll stop by the academy one last time. Tell them to breathe before they move. Always, he said. She offered her hand, he took it. Firm, steady. A soldier's grip, softened by time. Thank you, Chief, he said quietly. For what? For proving that humility isn't weakness. It never was, she said. It's just rare. When he left the next morning, the pier was empty. Her boat was gone. Just the soft sound of the waves and a small brass tag nailed to the wooden railing, catching the light. He leaned closer. It was simple, no rank, no inscription. Just 3 words etched clean. Dignity, speak. He smiled, his throat tightening. Of course she'd leave something like that. Something that said everything without needing to explain a thing. Months later, back at the academy, Reynolds found himself walking the halls for the last time. The corridors were lined with photographs, commanders, units, heroes. And then halfway down the wall, a new frame. A still shot from the kill house. A woman's silhouette mid-turn, muzzle flash frozen, eyes locked forward. Beneath it, a plaque that read, Chief Anya Sharma, quiet professional, 2.7 seconds, eternal lesson. He stopped there, hands clasped behind him, and closed his eyes. He could almost hear her voice again, calm, level, certain. Not a command, not a lecture. Just the kind of truth that stays with you, because it's too simple to forget. He opened his eyes, smiled, and whispered, Lesson complete. Then he walked away, leaving the echo of his footsteps in the corridor slow, even, perfectly timed. Far from the academy, somewhere off the coast of Port Salis, a small fishing vessel cut through the dawn fog. At its helm, Anya adjusted the throttle and squinted toward the horizon. Another day, another beginning. The radio beside her crackled with static, then a voice. To all stations, stand by for silent check. She reached for the handset, pressed the button, and said softly, "Copy that, standing by." Then she released it, and the channel went quiet again, just the sound of the sea, steady and endless. She smiled to herself, eyes fixed on the rising sun. The world would never know her name, but it would know her stillness. And that was enough. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.